morning.
Thanks for coming in this, what's going to be a nice day, but still a little foggy morning.
It was very foggy. I wasn't sure it was
Very foggy, yes indeed. I don't know if anybody wants to make any comments about what we have done in previous sessions. If you have anything to add, we can certainly do that, take the time to do that this morning. No problem with that at all. I have sometimes thought that I do my best thinking after the gathering or meeting is over. And sometimes it's kind of nice after the fact if you've reflected on things, when anything to add. I know Larry in the narthex was telling me, or telling us a little bit about his draft experience and his experience with the military, and has an interesting story. I don't know if you want to just kind of take a moment and share that with the rest of the group before I begin with the vignette for this morning.
Hello, okay. My draft experience was we lived in northwest Orange County, California, La Habra, California. And come 18, you have to register for the draft, no choice. And so I registered for the draft, and for some reason my draft board ended up in Pasadena, California, which is Los Angeles County. And so my first year in college, I took a full load. It was 2 semesters, full load the first semester, but I dropped the class. And it put me below full units. And so what happened was I became 1A. You went from a 4S status student to a 1A status, able to be drafted. And the draft board would do nothing. They were just hardcore. Once you became 1A, there's no going back. And so I was able to finish my second semester at college. That takes a while for the bureaucracy to get going. And so I decided, well, I'm going to enlist in the Army and try to avoid the infantry. And I was living in the dorms at Cal State Fullerton at the time. We were talking around with people in the place, and I thought about going in the Air Force, but you couldn't get in. There was there was a waiting list. And the draft was breathing down my back. So and I was talking to classmates, and I said, oh, well, I think I want to go to language school at Monterey. And I thought I'd end up working in an embassy somewhere, Some light duty, but...
diplomatic
an
career in front of you.
An attaché, And what happened was, so I was able to get into a group called the Army Security Agency, which is signal intelligence, and it was reports on a dotted line to the National Security Agency. So you have to have a top secret cryptographic clearance to work for and that sounds better on the outside than it does on the end, but and so I passed the clearance, and I went to basic training. Oh, I know. When I was I joined the Army in Los Angeles, and I went to join the Army, and you have to, go down to downtown Los Angeles, ate at the literal greasy spoon, and when I was sitting in and he says, well, you're ASA, so we're going to separate you from the other people. And so they stuck me in this big room by myself, and they forgot about me. and I was there for like 8 hours. And, and I finally go up, and I'm not usually too intrusive, but I go up and ask, say, wasn't I supposed to be going up to Monterey today for Fort Ord? And they said, oh, we forgot about that. So then they said, well, we'll fly you up there. So they took me out, they got me transportation to the airport, and I flew this prop jet plane from LA to Monterey. And it was an old, these puddle hoppers, they call them, and the thing was like shaking. And I thought, man, I'm not even going to make basic training, I'll go down in a plane crash. and so then you come into Monterey and go out to Fort Ord, and literally shaking in my boots, and I got there right around dinner time. So I go into this mess hall, and I go in through the wrong door. And the mess sergeant said, blankety blank, don't you know where the effing front door is?
No, I don't.
and so I got dinner, and the group of people in my platoon were blacks from South Central Los Angeles, farm kids from Eastern Washington, and some people we weren't even U.S. citizens, from Hollywood, California. And one of them was a screenwriter for the show F Troop. So it was a big mixture of people, but it's the most integrated group I've ever been in at the time. So,
yeah.
Yep.
Well, thanks, Larry, for sharing that with us. Yeah, that's.
So it's a longer story, but.
Oh, I'm sure it's a much longer story. Yes. And you ended up in Eritrea, right? Yeah. My vignette for this week is entitled An Unanswered Prayer, or Was It? Late one afternoon, during my junior year in high school, my mother came to me and said that the pastor had just spoken with her and suggested that I should think about going to the seminary. While I was active in the church and its youth group, this was something that had never seriously crossed my mind. While she didn't express an opinion one way or the other, I can imagine that this certainly ran counter to every farm family's hope and desire for their sons who would hopefully take over the business. I let the idea soak in, and the more I thought about it over the next days and weeks, my prayer went something like this. Dear Lord, this is not for me. Please don't let it happen. I'm not sure what my idea at the time of divine providence was, but I think the subtext of my prayer was something like this. Not thy will be done, but my will be done. I suppose the idea floated around in the ethers of my mind for the next several years. But I do know that it was never a topic of serious consideration. I was off to other things. During my college years and upon graduation, the prospect of going to seminary was not on my screen. As I've said before, we got married the day after graduation and decided to get teaching jobs. How we got certified is a little unclear. We did that. We took jobs in Great Falls, Montana. For 2 years, I taught American history. Julie taught 6th grade. And the way my professional career turned out, this was probably the best journeyman experience I could have gotten. Most graduate programs, at least in my experience, didn't prepare students seriously to teach, as I was later to learn repeatedly. It was during this time that the prospect of going to the seminary came to the fore once again. There was a call, I'm sure, but it certainly wasn't a Damascus Road experience. I wasn't blinded or knocked to the ground. I didn't hear voices, and there were no bright lights. But there clearly was an emerging sense deep in my bones that this was the right thing to do. So the two of us packed up our things and moved to St. Paul, Minnesota, to begin Luther Seminary. The first day I set foot on the campus as a student, my mother's conversation with me years earlier flashed through my mind. The irony of it all was profound and moving. Yes, I thought my prayer had been answered and my will had been done, but not so quick. Maybe, just maybe, it was in fact thy will. This was more a sense than a definitive answer to the question, but it was real. I threw myself into my studies and the process of ministry formation during those years. Yet I also knew through and under it all that my calling was to teach. And that added a whole new dimension and probably years to the prospect. We moved to Washington, D.C. for my internship, and Julie taught. Julie taught at an inner city school filled with all sorts of challenges. It was not an easy year in a lot of ways for her. In my internship, some of you may have heard me say this before, I interned with Mark Brocker's uncle.
His uncle?
His uncle. Mark's mother was the youngest of this large family, and Clarence was the oldest. We got there, and before long, Clarence shared that his youngest sister had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. Mark's mother. He came out to visit, and then returned later in the fall, just before Christmas, to attend her funeral. Our first daughter was on her way as we returned to St. Paul for my final year at the seminary and arrived a month later. We had started a family, and the joy overwhelmed us. She was the most beautiful baby ever born, only to be followed by two more beauties, of course. But doing parish work before doing parish work for a time, we moved back east to Richmond, Virginia, where I did graduate work, and we lived among the Southern Presbyterians at Union Seminary in Virginia. Upon finishing, I received a call to be associate pastor at our Savior's Lutheran Church in Great Falls, Montana, a neighboring church to the one we had attended when we lived there before. This was a good place to get my feet wet in parish ministry. The people were supportive and understanding of their novice associate pastor. We made many good friends, but after 3 years, the call to teach had only intensified. While I obviously did not know this at the time, one of the heartbreaking things that would happen at our Savior's Lutheran in Great Falls, Montana, was that 3 boys I had had in confirmation class were to die prematurely of a frightful new disease sweeping the land, HIV/AIDS. We knew the parents, and that sadness has stayed with me through the years. Promising young lives snuffed out. It is easy now to forget the fear and moral judgment that had accompanied that scourge. After much deliberation, we sold everything we could, packed up ourselves and our 2 kids, and moved to Oxford, England for 4 years. Was this wisdom or folly? As with many things, many important things in life, it wasn't clear up front. As it turned out, it was one of the finest experiences of our lives. Oxford, that city of dreaming spires, lived up to its reputation as a strange and wonderful place. While I studied for my terminal degree, as we say in the academic world, I know that sounds downright deadly. Julie taught needlework classes, worked with women who spoke little English, and once we got a car, she toured family and friends throughout the English Cotswold hills and villages. It was idyllic. While the complex of flats we lived in must have been designed in the early Russian Revolution tradition, they were warm and there were people from all over the world. Our 2 daughters, now 2 and 5, started school in North Oxford, and as they and their friends swarmed over the grounds playing, they looked like the Rainbow Coalition on the move. Our 3rd daughter would eventually be born there, in our flat, no less. A shout out to British maternity care, which was superb. With the degree in hand, it was time to return to the States for the first time in 4 years and start looking for a teaching job. With many farewells, going away parties, and not a few tears, we boarded the plane at Heathrow and headed home. While we would return over the years for extended periods of time and study, it would no longer be our primary home. But in some other sense, it would always be our home. As I remember it, one of our daughters, which one I don't remember for sure, with puzzlement and sincerity in her voice, framed by a beautiful English accent, asked, "How long do I have to go to school?" This wasn't a question of government requirements or a desire to drop out as a grade schooler. She had just observed her father, who didn't seem to be able to get out. It was now time for the next chapter. Still, there were no certainties, but perhaps many possibilities. With a growing family, we knew we needed a new and different kind of stability. We needed a rootedness we had both experienced growing up. But what would it be? And where would it be? And what would it look like? A few questions for our deliberation today. How would you describe your sense of Christian call? And I use the word call advisedly here. There are many other words you could substitute for that. How would you describe your sense of Christian call? How has it played itself out in your life? Has the sense of call played itself out in your professional life? If so, how? How has that sense of call changed, matured, or maybe even gone away in some sense over time? Questions for us to share, think about, talk about. And again, the word call, I think, is an appropriate word, but it is a word that may not necessarily be common in our society at large, but it popped up in the worship service this morning as well.
I was going to wait till somebody else was talking, but ever since I was a small girl, I always wanted to be a nurse, and that was my goal, even until after graduating from high school, and I went to college and got whatever pre-nursing course, went up to the OHSU and was in pre-nursing, and I think my call started, well, besides getting married, which we were advised not to do during this course, I did, but a patient fell out of bed, and the family was going to sue the hospital, me, anybody involved with this. And what I did was, I was married, and so I had to get home to my husband by a certain time, so I gave my very last duties of this, my pre-nursing thing, to the nurse coming on duty after me, and somehow the patient fell in the meantime. So anyway, that ended my nursing career very quickly. And so years later, I had aptitude test, and it wasn't in science or nursing or anything. It was in the arts. So after having 3 kids, playing for church at St. Matthew Lutheran Church for quite a while, taking organ lessons, I went back to school to get a little bit more head knowledge, and I got my degree. So that was my change of action. And I'm still using, not for organ, because my degree was a Bachelor of Science in Organ Performance. Have you ever heard of that before? Mm-hmm. And anyway, I'm using my piano now, and I have my piano where I live in the retirement place, and I play a recital once a month and play for the singing group there, and I have a few students. So there's my career that I should have started with.
Sometimes it doesn't operate just in a straight line, does it? You may have heard me say, the scenic route is often more interesting.
This was not a good scenic route.
This wasn't even a good scenic route, huh? Yeah.
Okay. Well, I kind of always wanted to be a teacher, and when I graduated high school, from Sunset High School here, going to college, there were no teaching jobs. None. Unless you wanted to go way out in the boonies somewhere, and I didn't want to do that. So I could still see myself sitting up at in the lounge area at Portland Community College going through the manual, what can I do, what can I do, what can I do? And I ended up in a different career, which I enjoyed, but it came to a point where I had to make a decision, and I decided to leave that profession and go back and get my teaching certificate, which I did. Took a class at Portland State, and then I went down to Monmouth for 2 years. And at that time, the elementary education program at Oregon College of Education, now Western Oregon University, was the second-ranked elementary prep program in the United States. So I was very fortunate. I had wonderful instructors, and you do more than the norm in terms of time in the classroom. You start your junior year down there, and you're evaluated and everything. And when I was going to go for my first time in the elementary school, my professor said, well, this is could have been Chapter 1 or Title I school. It's gone back and forth, and I had no idea what that was. And that is considered a school with kids who are lower in the higher number in free and reduced lunch, and kids come from poverty. So I said, oh, I want to do that. So I did, and it was just, I had a wonderful mentor. Started out in the 3rd grade there, and I remember my first lesson where my professor, who just had such a stern look, and I was always told about him, but I thought he was wonderful, Dr. Gerard. And I was doing a reading lesson, and kids were just going bonkers. And so I just stopped everything I was doing in my small group instruction, and I addressed the class, and everything settled down. And my mentor teacher whispered in my ear, "You done good." I have never, ever forgotten that statement. And every school I worked in was a Title I school. I absolutely enjoyed it, and that's where it's just something, because I was not raised. I lacked in absolutely nothing. Materially, I had a full family, everything. It wasn't perfect. We all have our issues, but in terms of what some of these kids were going through, it was a real lesson that has stuck with me throughout my life. Oh.
Well, I'll tell my path now. After getting out of the Army, I was in 3 years and 9 months in the Army. I served on 4 continents. North America, Europe, Asia, Southeast Asia, Vietnam, and Africa, Eritrea, Ethiopia at the time. And I got a 3-month drop on my enlistment to go to Portland State. And my folks had moved to Newberg, Oregon in the meantime, so I had in-state tuition in Oregon. And Portland State also had a program in Yugoslavia for a study abroad. And when the language I got in the Army was Serbo-Croatian, which is the main language of Yugoslavia. And so I got to spend 9 months in Zagreb, Yugoslavia at the University of Zagreb. Invaluable experience. And then I got a degree in political science and a certificate in Central European Studies. And I went to law school, Lewis and Clark Law School. I wanted to be a lawyer. And so went to 3 years of law school, took the bar exam, took the bar preparation course, which was run by Willamette University, in order to pass the bar. And actually people haven't gone to a day of law school and taken the review class and still passed the bar. So they help. And so I looked for a job to be a lawyer, and I applied to a number of places. One of the ones I interviewed was for assistant district attorney in Clatsop County, which is Astoria. And so I go out there, and I was single, I wasn't married, so I go out there and I interview at the class and at the job site in the courthouse. And you go through all these questions, and I think the guy was afraid that since I was single, I'd be running back to Portland every weekend. And and then one of his answers, we're a pretty close-knit community here. Can you be a son of a bitch? And he says, what do you mean by that? Well, you're going to probably prosecute people you know. I could be a son of a bitch just like anybody else. but I didn't get the job. I also interviewed for a job in Lewistown, Montana.
You told me about it.
Yeah, and that would, I mean, if you get these jobs, your whole life changes. So, and that one didn't come through either. So then I'll go out on my own and just put up my law shingle and go out on my own. But they said, before you do that, you probably want to take some accounting classes. And so I took some accounting classes at night at Portland State. And then I realized and they said, well, the requirements for the CPA exam is a college degree, so many units in accounting, and then you can take the exam. I thought, God, I might as well do that. And so one of the classes I took at Portland State was taught by a accounting manager from Tektronix. And this was a winter class, and we had to miss a class one day because of bad weather. And so we made up for it on a Saturday. And I thought about cutting that class because there was a folk dance festival going on in Seattle. But I didn't cut the class. It was a morning class, so I didn't cut the class. I went up there that afternoon. Next morning, I had breakfast by the University of Washington, walk into the restaurant, and there's Bonnie with a bunch of other people from Portland, folk dancers. 15 months later, we were married.
Must have been Providence.
And so then Portland State had a job board there on the accounting area, and there was a position for a part-time accounting position at Tektronix. And I applied for that job. First accounting job I got a job, so I was at Tektronix for 18 years, and then 13 years at ESCO Corp as an accountant. So that's how it happened.
Well, Julie and I have friends. We met in Washington, D.C., and Don went to the Air Force Academy, and he was fulfilling his obligation, and put in his 5 years, I think it was, and then he moved back to Minnesota to a small town, and Don was an attorney there. But he told me early on how much accounting work he actually did in that small town legal practice, which would probably confirm your experience with regard to that.
I don't think I need to tell you my story, but as I hear these different stories and I hear where you started and what you took and how you changed and stuff, and I think of my grandson now is in Lyon, France, and he's international studies, working for his master's degree, and now he's he's going to a French university, so he asked, all they speak is French in there, and he passed the test to get in there, but now he's kind of second thought. He thinks maybe he should go into Paris, and there's some classes are taught in English also, and he's also teaching English to students in the area there. He's hired,
French students.
So it's really a good experience, But what I keep telling these kids, I says, get your degree, whatever, and just move on. I said to him, listen to Larry, listen to Larry's story, listen to your story. I mean, there's all kinds of things out there. The main thing is that, I work for Consolidated Freightways. I mean, if you got your degree, they'll teach you how they want to run the company, but they know you were smart enough to get a degree, and they will spend the time with you. And I tell them that, so.
Yeah, Larry, and I think you've probably heard me say this before, but that colleges and universities do all sorts of research on graduates 5, 10, 15, 30 years out. And it's amazing across the board how many students never work or work very briefly in the area where they majored.
Right.
And I've often thought exactly what you're saying. Get your degree, get those foundational skills, broaden your horizons, and then see how the journey takes you.
And the other thing, let's just stop with this. You don't go to the top right away. You start your job. I worked for, I'm trying to tell you my story. I taught for 6 years, then I got into teacher strike, and I got out of that, and I went into computer work, had to go back to school, worked for Consolidated Freightways, and I started taking the carbon paper out of, they had six copies. That was my job at 12 o'clock at night to 8 in the morning. Take the carbon paper out of these, you can imagine what I look like at the end of the day, all over that stuff, And then I worked my way up. It took a lot of years. I was there 32 years. I ended up in the computer center. I worked in there for probably about 12 years. I had every job you could ever have, but I mean, it's really good. When you have 100 or 30,000 devices hooked into our computer center, I mean, it's a big computer center, and we control the whole nation there.
Keep the mic over close.
Oh, I'm moving. Yeah, I'm starting to talk with my hands. And then I went into programming and analyst work, which when I quit teaching, I had to go back to school, and I got a certificate in writing three different languages in computer stuff. Mm-hmm. But it took me 12 years to get from that to in my company. Mm-hmm. But the pay was good. I worked a lot of hours, and I worked my way up, and it just works out, and that's what I keep telling my kids.
So you worked for a company for a lot of years, but there were many different jobs in that employment setting, right?
Yeah, I'll just finish with saying that our company went broke, but I could have retired, before. I was going to retire when I was 55, and I probably could have, but I was getting so much vacation, so much time off, personal time off, and this and that. I didn't know what I was going to do with my time. And I liked my job, and my job was kind of independent. I wrote programs, analyst work, but there's a lot of ways you can do that, but you just got to work and no mistakes. And I liked that job, so I would have stayed there another year or two, but didn't. Mm-hmm. So.
But that is, what I'm hearing here in these stories is that there is a sense of, to use the kind of traditional word, a sense of call that may not just drop in, but it emerges over time, develops into a passion, as we've talked a little bit about before, that starts to burn and keeps you going. Sometimes it's a major turn. Other times it's an evolution. And that passion, that sense of call, probably also pertains to how one thinks about their relationship with the church, the faith, and all of these things too, so that one's value system plays itself out in the life of your professional vocation as well, in terms of the way you deal with people, deal with work, productive work, and all of that. I think those are interesting stories. Ju?
That certainly resonates for me, and I was a history major, graduated from PLU, and there weren't very many history jobs in high schools at the time, and so I took two classes my senior year to prepare to be able to teach upper elementary, just in case I couldn't get a history job, which is what I did. And I too, Bonnie, taught in Title I schools, and gosh, it was an education and a window on the world that was really formative in a lot of ways. But it wasn't my calling, and I think then, we ended up packing up these two little girls and going to Oxford for 4+ years. And there I was involved in a lot of different things, these classes that I taught, so that we could, have a vehicle and get out of town once in a while. But when we came back with then a third child, it was a little bit, who am I and what am I going to do with my life? And I didn't want to be pushed, or I wanted to discover that on my own. And so that was a little bit of a dodgy time for considering where and what I was going to do. And when Jim then was asked to come to Concordia in Moorhead, Minnesota.
So you're getting into my next venue.
Oh, okay. I'll just tell my bit from that time forward. I truly did find a calling, a vocation, and it was as synod staff, working with pastors and educators and church leaders to find curriculum and resources for all kinds of ministry. And I did a lot of writing and then worked with the ELCA and became part of churchwide staff as well, doing the same work. So writing was at the heart of it, but also teaching, because I was working with various people in the church.
Yeah. Any other comments that anybody wants to make? These are interesting stories, and I don't know about you, but from my point of view, one of the interesting things about this kind of class and this kind of setting is you get to know other people's stories.
A couple things. One thing, in the military, in the Army, we called it 6-ply, which is that paper with 6 copies of it. So you had to distribute it to all these different boxes, I don't know, does anybody else want to speak about vocation at all? Because I have a question about Oxford.
Yeah.
And how Oxford has a number of different colleges, and they're scattered about the town, right? I mean, in the United States, we have a centralized college campus. Europe, you have buildings.
Yeah. That's exactly right, and that developed historically, because the earliest colleges are back into the 12th and 13th centuries, and they were often or very much like monastic settings. So you have different tiers, and it's coming from an American setting. It seems strange, but when we were there, 30-some colleges. And the whole area of Central and North Oxford is taken up by these colleges. What you probably don't know is that the southeast end of Oxford was car works, automobile factories. So it was they would talk about it as the town and the gown kind of issues. So everybody is associated with a college. For undergraduates, that's more important than it is for graduate students. Graduate students are also not only a member of a college, but they're a member of a faculty or a department. And the tutors and the Oxford Dons and professors are in that faculty, are situated at all sorts of different colleges. Are you with me so far? It's kind of strange, but so they have appointments at this college, that college, but they're part of the faculty. And that is really the part the layer of the university that governs graduate students. Then you have the university over that. So you have the university grants the degrees, the university grants or oversees the examination system. It's an examination and a tutorial system, examination system, unlike an American situation, which is credit-based. So if you are going to start as an undergraduate at a place like Oxford, which is a 3-year degree, you are probably educationally at the level of where we would be in this country sometime during your sophomore year in college. And then you will have exams from your tutors and your college along the way, but it's the end where you take your comprehensive exams, and you get wouldn't be ABC, but it's a first degree or a second degree, and those are all published in the spring in the Times of London. Your grades are published. And so there's a lot riding on it, and those undergraduates were always terrified. Graduate students, you work with a tutor or tutors, and every term, there are 3 terms in the year, there are public lectures, and you decide to go to this one, and this one, and that one, any given term, and then there are seminars which you're expected to attend, and it's writing intensive kind of arrangement. And then at the end, you go through this, assuming you're successful, and unlike an American PhD system, you are examined. You cannot be examined by anybody at the end who has been involved in your instruction.
In your what?
Instruction. Anybody who's worked with you in your program is not eligible to examine you. So they bring people from elsewhere. And that is a very, it can be a very ruthless system. What they call a viva oral exam, for example, went for about an hour and a half. That is an hour and 45 minutes in a room you're being examined by people who have never examined you. And it was short. That was short. And that's always a good sign. The bad sign is when they examine you for 6 or 8 hours and then they recess and say, we'll convene tomorrow morning. That's not a good sign. So it can be a ruthless system. In my case, it was very affirming and et cetera, et cetera. But it's just, when you're an outsider to that system, you've got to kind of learn the system. And even after 4 years, I was surprised by certain things that would come along. But it is a very interesting kind of environment. Okay, I think our time is up. Thanks for, John.
Are you able to teach after you've gone through all of these exams and your college work in England? Can you teach in the U.S.?
Yeah, you know, in college, it's not like the public schools where you have to be certified. You have to have either place, normally, what we call a terminal degree. That isn't always a PhD. There are certain fields, for example, accounting. We would have accountants who had a lot of real-world practice as accountants teaching. So you have to satisfy the institution. Yeah, you don't have to get a certificate like you do to teach in the public schools. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.